government team believes that Africa should take care of its continent as a whole, and therefore we're proud to support the resolution that is presented. This House should fight Boko Haram. Resolution analysis is the A point is going to be a policy debate. The B point determines this House as the African Union. We're going to find fight as to use force to defeat an enemy. We're going to find Boko Haram as an Islamic group that's causing terror in Africa. Subpoint C is going to be the plain text. African Union will start a coalition to fight against Boko Haram. And the funding will be through the normal means of the African Union budget of over the 50 countries that are involved. Subpoint D is going to be net benefits. And any questions?
Yeah, can I get a repetition of your plain text?
Repetition. AU will start a coalition to fight against Boko Haram. Observation 2, we're going to tagline this as cutting off recruitment. The harms is that the 8 point is that social media and the new day we live in is leading to easy access and real-time 24/7 recruitment for terrorist groups. We've seen this with ISIS strong propaganda and recruiting many members solely through social media and converting people to join their groups. And we also see that Boko Haram is doing this as well with their social media campaigns to increase the recruits. And they're also, Boko Haram is gaining insights from ISIS on using social media. So now they're gaining insights on ISIS, who are basically the top dogs on social media recruitment, which is going to increase the harms for the future level magnitude. The subpoint B is the inherency, is that without the African Union's coalition to fight against Boko Haram, that countries like Nigeria won't have access to African Union cybersecurity group that is tasked force with combating cyber crime and protecting cyber infrastructure. And I'll get you to the bottom of this. The solvency is that by increasing the intel and resources from the African Union will lead to help fighting Boko Haram on the social media and cyber level too. The subpoint D is going to be impacts. We're going to decrease Boko Haram's access to online recruitment through social media, which is going to lead to the decrease of Boko Haram's power and exponential growing power and strength of their organization group, which is going to lead to an increase in quality of life in African countries because cutting off a significant portion of their recruitment is going to lead to them causing less terror in Africa. And question.
How many people have access to the internet in Nigeria?
More people in each day because it's an online growing expansion in Africa, and they do have recruitments in Africa through social media.
So just to be clear, you don't have a number?
I don't have a number, but it's more than, I would say, a lot. It's more than none, and that's enough to fight against it.
More than millions.
Yeah. If they're recruiting through social media, that's one person. That's one more person that could cause harm. That's one more person that could blow up stuff. And so we're getting solvency on cutting off the recruitment through social media. Observation 3 is going to be stopping Boko Haram's range of terror. Subpoint A is the harms that Boko Haram is dangerous. It's just the tagline. Boko Haram is dangerous and willing and able to commit crime. Just in one massacre, they killed over 2,000 people. And just today, they already have killed 12 people. And we have known that they have kidnapped over hundreds of people and committed other types of horrible crimes like slavery and sexual assault. And now they have 20,000 square miles of territory in Africa. And we've even shown that Boko Haram is claiming allegiance with ISIS, which means that is horrible because we do not want Boko Haram and ISIS to be collaborating in Africa because that's going to lead to increase of terrorism and their amount of power. The subpoint B is that there is no coalition that's fighting against Boko Haram to stop their reign of terror in Africa. Nigeria says that they cannot fight Boko Haram alone, and that's why we are proud to support African Union starting a coalition to fight against Boko Haram. The solvency is that with the African Union's budget and resources and intel and just collaborative effort with over 50 countries, it's going to help solve for this problem. And we've already seen in one instance that the African Union had a small task force with only 3 countries that have already won a battle against Boko Haram. So we see that African Union is capable of fighting and stopping Boko Haram, but in just starting this and passing this plan of the coalition is going to easily defeat Boko Haram. So we're going to see a decrease in the power and strength in Boko Haram, which is going to lead them not be able to commit the horrible crimes that they do, like slavery, sexual assault, in the amount of massacres that they commit on innocent people's lives, and also is going to lead them to not be able to kidnap as much of the people that they have, and basically give back Africa its territory, give back them a huge significant amount of the 20,000 miles of territory that they have lost, and all of the innocent civilians that have been displaced because of this. And question.
How much is the AU's budget, and how much of the budget is being used for this coalition?
The AU's budget is over $280 million, and it's way more significant than the budget that's in Nigeria. And the use of money is going to be through normal means of how much they believe they should use. And so now we know that. So we even see solvency on a more level because the African Union's budget is significantly larger than any country that's being affected by Boko Haram. And observation number 4 is African Union's credibility. The harms of the Africans' credibility is very low and unstable. Examples: the South Sudan incident and the wars and the bad things that happened in the dark region, which we'll elaborate on. Also, just a bad history of international involvement that threatens the sovereignty of Africa as a continent. The inherency is that African Union has a lack of trust and lack of getting involved in helping their domestic issues. And so we're going to solve this by African Union is going to take charge, take step, lead the coalition against Boko Haram, which will increase their credibility and trust within the country. And the impacts is going to lead to increasing the African Union's credibility and stability, and it's going to lead to a decrease in involvement from international, which is going to decrease the bad thing that happens from international involvement, like nation building. And for all those reasons, you're going to support African Union fighting against Boko Haram.
Okay, for a quick off-time roadmap, I'm going to go off case and then on case. Okay, so thanks everyone for being here, and I first want to start out with a vagueness critique. The A point of this here is the violation, is that in their plan, which is the African Union will start a coalition to fight Boko Haram, they give us no specifics on what this coalition will do, how many countries are allowed to be in it, what they're actually going to do. None of this. They'd have an advantage about cyber crime or like cutting off recruitment, but they don't give us any details of how that's going to happen in their plan, what's going on, how much access the African Union has to these resources. They gave us a figure, they have only $280 million. That's not a lot of money, so I don't know how the African Union is going to do. I don't know if they're going to send boots on the ground or what's going to happen to fight Boko Haram, but they're claiming all these impacts without it. So the B point here is there's no the standards here is just fairness. They don't give us enough ground to argue on. They don't tell us what they're arguing. So essentially, my voters are going to be that this is potential abuse, because what they're saying is if they come back and saying, oh, the African Union can do all this, that they'll have military ability to fight Boko Haram, they'll also fight them through social media, then that will be abuse of our ground / our debate prep, our ability to have a fair debate. So that's my first thing. Now on to DA1 of cycle of poverty. According to the Guardian, Nigeria has a 60% absolute poverty rating among their people, meaning that they have a huge poverty problem with this. The B point is that poverty is the main reason why terrorist organizations like Boko Haram can form up. We see poorer, more war-ravaged places like Nigeria have like fertile soil for terrorist groups to grow. So then the C point here is that you need to empower a country through poverty eradication to stop this. According to a March 8th article of The Guardian, they say by only getting rid of a country's poverty will you be able to really stop terrorist organizations from growing. So the D point is, without addressing poverty in their case, they're allowing Boko Haram to grow, meaning that more terrorism will happen, that they'll continue on this cycle of poverty, and this has multi-generational impacts of kids growing up poor, kids not even being able to grow up because they'll be dying because they have a lack of child care or anything. So this will lead me right to my counter plan, which is that the WTO will give debt forgiveness for any country that helps out Nigeria either through militarily or humanitarianly to defeat Boko Haram. The time frame's immediately. Everything would happen right away. Yes, Joe?
So this would mean like if Iran or North Korea or China or Russia decided to contribute like one troop to help fight against Boko Haram,
it's only to African country, only to African nations who decide to help with this.
Only
African nations will be able to do this. So they can send humanitarian aid, provide for refugees, or send military aid or medical equipment. All of that will count, and then the WTO will then figure out how much debt forgiveness that they can. It's kind of like a tax write-off would be the system that they have in place. So the net benefits to this plan is that it would end that cycle of poverty that I talked about in day 2. You would get rid of this poverty because Nigeria is a rich country with a $500 billion GDP. They are actually rich, but because of this debt they have to the WTO, they're not allowed to give it to the people. So this plan would help empower people. It would help empower all of Africa to be able to provide better for their citizens and also fight Boko Haram, so it would get all the solvency of their plan and also avoid any sort of DA. So now let's get on to their DA. First they say cutting off recruitment. First of all, they claim that the AU only has $280 million to fight this, so that's not enough money to fight recruitment, to do all this they're claiming, so they really have no way of doing this, so there's no solvency there. Yes, Joe?
If $280 million is not enough, then how much money do they need?
So will the AU give all their money to stopping Boko Haram all to Nigeria? I guess.
No, they're not giving it to any country. They're using
so they're using Boko Haram. 280 is not enough. We could see how buying a tank would cost you millions of dollars. This is simply not enough to fight a terrorist group with 20,000 kilometers of space. Secondly, there's no inherency here. They can't stop Twitter. They're not actually doing anything illegal by just getting Twitter followers, and that's what they're saying is their recruitment method. So they're not actually stopping anything with like a cyber terrorism style. They can't prevent Twitter followers, people from following. And then, like my partner said, Nigeria doesn't have a big Twitter base. So this is more of an ISIS thing that they're talking about that doesn't apply to Boko Haram. So you can see that none of their impacts will flow across because they have no solvency whatsoever. Then their next advantage, which they didn't title, is something about Boko Haram being dangerous and willing to commit crimes. However, all this information is old, of having like 20,000 square miles. Today, the Lieutenant Colonel Asukwa Ika, the commanding officer of Nigerian troops, says that they have reclaimed all captured territories from Boko Haram, and that Madagali is the only local government left that's in Boko Haram's control. So this has so they have really no harms here. And then to their inherency of starting the African Union to stop this, there is no inherency because a multilateral aid is already happening. 8,500 troops from Chad, Nigeria, Niger, and Benin have all been in Nigeria fighting Boko Haram, so you don't need their plan because it's already happening. There's a coalition of African countries already fighting Boko Haram in Nigeria, already doing all this. So they're non-unique, their entire case. None of it is new, none of it's solving anything. It's just doing a plan for the sake of doing something, but it's already solving itself because there's already this multilateral. Their B point is that there was no coalition fighting Boko Haram. That's their entire inherency they laid out. But I just told you there is a coalition, so they have no access to any of their impacts. And so it's already been fighting. Also, our counterplan could do it better. And then they say lack of trust in the AU. But because there's no inherency, because there's already a multilateral group doing this, it wouldn't increase the African Union's trust. It would actually reinforce the African Union's perception of being pointless and unnecessary because it's already happening without the AU. So thank you. That's why you should be voting opposition today. I wrote it, but
Okay.
Alright, off-case roadmap. Gonna go in the same order with off-case and then case. I think it's really good that we're having this debate, and I think there's some clash as to sort of what is the best way to stop a really violent group of people who are going to continue to hurt innocents unless they're responded to with force. So I want to first get to these off-case arguments. First, the vagueness. Their A point is that they say our plan has no specifics. Like, what do we do? First of all, we address, like, everything I'm going to say right now is nothing new. You'll remember it from Lasai's PMC. What do? We said it's like the coalition versus ISIS, where we get a lot of countries involved, and we use the budget from the African Union. The number of countries, we said that it's more than 50. Precisely, it's 54 countries in the African Union. So we already said all those things. So now the fact is that their A point, there's no, nothing we're being vague about. They say, well, 280 million is not a lot, but that's not has nothing to do with vagueness. That's actually us actually giving them a number. Every point of information that they asked us during our plan was answered. So look down to their impacts where they say potential abuse. There is going to be no abuse in this debate, and it is going to be their burden to articulate any abuse. Yeah, what's up?
my question is, what action specifically is this coalition going to take?
It's going to include troops on the ground as well as things like Lasai was talking about, fighting on social media.
Intel resources, collaborative effort.
Yeah, similar things that we're doing, right, with the coalition against ISIS. So now, disadvantage 1, cycle of poverty. Their A point is that Nigeria has a big poverty problem, and that so my response is that they claim that it's because of this debt that they owe, but debt is not what makes nations go into poverty. They don't pay that debt back anyway. The problem is the leadership in Nigeria, particularly their president, Goodluck Jonathan. As you can tell by his name, he's trying to give this impression that he's a good guy, but when in fact there are several allegations of corruption, and he silences political opposition. So it's the leadership, rather, that's causing this poverty, and we can see that in countless examples. It's not because of debt. They say that poverty allows for terrorist recruitment. I agree, but I think that what's more important than poverty is that these terrorists are able to recruit through social media, which now more and more people are getting access to. Yeah, I'll get to you at the bottom. Their C point is that, like, so this empowers them, so we have to do poverty eradication to empower them. I think to say that we're going to eradicate poverty in any regard is just not really something that we can do. But again, what our plan does is it allows Nigeria, instead of expending all of its resources on its own military to fight, it's the African Union is coming in and saying, look, we know this is a regional problem, so let's all share our resources so that one specific country doesn't have to take the whole financial burden of this. Yeah, what's up?
Wouldn't you agree that poorer people are more likely to be targets of, like, terrorist recruitment and more likely to do extremist things?
Yeah, and I think that the primary way that they're targeted is through social media, which is what we're solving for. Okay, so then go to their impacts where they say, because we don't address poverty, we increase terrorism, which is an intergenerational impact. we decrease terrorism because we do address poverty when we say, look, Nigeria, we're going to allow you to keep more of your resources and you don't have to fight this battle on your own. We think that bridges work better than walls, and cooperation and sharing resources and intelligence is going to help Nigeria, again, deal with its economic issues. So now, counterplan. About the WTO giving debt forgiveness to African countries who help in the fight, we can easily perm this, and the African Union includes all of the African countries, so we could just perm this right out. There was no point of competition. So we can perm this. So yeah. Also, like, okay, our plan is a lot clearer than their counter plan. So if you're gonna vote for a vagueness argument, you're gonna vote for it against the negative team. They don't tell us like, what debt is being forgiven or anything like that. Yeah. Question.
A perm tax. Are you advocating a test of competition, or are you advocating an actual something?
Test of competition. Both. But basically, we can perm this, and because there's no competition, as far as a perm text, we can get to that in a later speech if that becomes an issue. But I want to get to case. So let's look to our advantage one, where we talk about how this coalition of the African Union will decrease the recruitment of terrorist organizations. So look, it looked like our case is centered about decreasing the ability of these organizations to recruit. So it's not like we're telling them that that recruitment is not an issue. So their responses were that first, $280 million is not enough. Then I asked them how much money is enough, basically to say that $280 million is enough. And the fact is that Nigeria already has troops there, and they already say there's a task force already on the ground. So they're not going to have to devote all of this budget to engage in this coalition. The coalition primarily is about cooperation, which doesn't necessarily cost resources. Then their second thing is, we can't stop Twitter. My first response is that, well, yes, we can monitor Twitter, but secondly is that, such as like the U.S. government is doing, we can subpoena Twitter for, which the African Union will be able to do, subpoena Twitter for account information of accounts that are making violent remarks or seem like they are in support of Boko Haram. So we can absolutely monitor and get that information from Twitter. Their third response was that there aren't enough internet users in Nigeria. This is just blatantly false. There are millions of internet users in Nigeria, several of which have already been recruited through these means. So we think even if it's one internet user who's recruited to Boko Haram through Twitter or through Facebook, whatever social media it is that our plan solves for, that if we solve for that and we stop one person from being radicalized and committing violence, that's the solvency that we need. So those were their three responses. Now let's get down to the impact, where we tell you that this will decrease the strength of Boko Haram, which then increases the quality of life for people in those areas, but also decreases terrorism, which is really important. But so now let's get to our advantage two of sort of decreasing this really brutal violence that Boko Haram is causing. When Lasai brings up like torture, sex slavery, things like that, displaced peoples. Their first response is that they have one military official who says that they reclaimed all but one territory. This is just not true. They haven't reclaimed all but one territory. In fact, I was just reading an article that said Chadian military suffers like big losses in the fight against Boko Haram. So the fact is that like Boko Haram has a lot of resources and a lot of training, and the fact that they're now pledging their allegiance to ISIS means that ISIS will now be willing to give them more support because ISIS obviously has some sort of idea of expanding their reach. Yeah, what's that?
So when you say some guy, you don't trust the Nigerian commanding officer of all Nigerian troops?
I'm not saying that I don't trust him. I'm just saying that there are more than just one opinion on things like that. And secondly, how big is that territory, right, that he says they still hold? Because Lasai says they hold 20,000 square miles of territory, and that general did not dispute that. He just says we've gained back some territory. Their second response was that we already have a coalition, and we say it's not a coalition, it's actually called a task force, and it's 3 countries, which is still not working, and they're suffering heavy losses. So that's why we're saying, when they say we have no inherency because there already is a coalition, we're saying there's a task force, but this problem is bigger than that. We need a coalition, the same way that the United States is leading a coalition against ISIS. And so because we have inherency, now let's get to our impacts, which are a big deal of decreasing the power of Boko Haram. But let's talk about AU credibility really quickly. They turn and say, no, this only reinforces because it seems like a multilateral idea. The fact is that this is not multilateral. This is literally the African Union saying, let's take care of ourselves, not allow for international patriarchy to get involved in our system, and let's solve our problems for ourselves to increase our own trust.
I'll start off on same order. Thank you everyone for being here. Let's get straight into this. In addressing the vagueness, let's be clear. Vagueness still stands because they say they answered all of our questions, but they really didn't. We asked how many internet users. It's like, oh well, there's a lot. How many is a lot? We talk about this. We talk about poverty. We talk about, so if all these people are in poverty, which both sides seem to agree, there's a lot of poverty in Nigeria, then how many people are really using the internet? We have no numbers. They don't offer any numbers as to how many people, and this actually links in to their advantage number one. They offer no numbers how many people are using the internet, how many people have been recruited. They tell you that if one person has been recruited, that's enough. One person does not give them solvency on this argument, one single person, and they don't warrant this out at all. Now let's get onto this $280 million, because it's kind of a contention. They say $200 million is plenty, but they don't tell us, are they using 10% of this, 20% of this, 30%? We have no idea how much of this $280 million are they using. Are they using all of it? We have no idea. So the vagueness, again, still stands because we don't know what to argue here. Now, again, they say they, and then the member of government stands up here and says, now we're also going to put troops on the ground. Troops on the ground was never brought up in the Prime Minister's speech. So now that they've added something, what my partner told you was that let's not them use future abuse. Don't let them stand up here and now add to the plan. That's exactly what they did. Now we're going to put troops on the ground. But again, they want to add troops to the ground. Awesome. How many troops? How many from which country? Who's running the coalition? Of the 54 countries, how many of these countries actually agreed to come in? They've given us of this. All they say is this is all going to happen. I'll get to that at the bottom. So looking at the C point, that we say there's going to be potential abuse, now there is, that potential abuse has actually become real abuse because now they've added to it. We talk about they take away grounds and stuff like that. So again, we don't know how much money is going to be spent, how many troops are going to be spent. They tell you we don't know how many internet users. We don't have any of this information, so we can't argue against it. And then we talk about debate prep. So again, this is something that while we can't prep out a case beforehand, we should know what they're going to say. I'll get to you now. Yes, sir.
Yeah, given that we have 7 minutes in the Prime Minister constructive speech, do you truly expect us to tell you every single country and exactly how many troops every one of those 54 countries is going to send?
I would like a total number of troops, and I would like a total amount of money you're going to use. I could have just used some round numbers. You offered none of those numbers. I don't need a 14-page plan. I do need to know out of $280 million, which you seem to come up with, how much you're going to spend. I would like to know how many troops are going to go to the ground. I think in your 7 minutes of prep time, you could have come up with that absolutely. And then when you stand up here in the second speech and say, now we're going to add ground troops, when you didn't say in the Prime Minister's speech, I now think potential abuse has become real abuse. So, moving on to the B point, cycle of poverty. Their first response is that they say that leadership is a problem, and then so let's scroll down. Let's scroll down to the impact where they say that when you have limited resources, when you decrease terrorism to keep the resources. Well, my response is the leadership is the problem, as they claim. Then how are they going to keep the resources? They've done nothing to change the leadership. So again, that bites into our plan because we're actually going to combat this in all 54 countries. So we now have more solvency than they do. I'll get you on the bottom here. So they also respond to the fact that they say you cannot eradicate poverty, and I would actually agree with that. The point is, are you ever going to get rid of anything 100%? No. but our plan is going to help do more for poverty than what they're going to do, and that's why you're going to prefer it. They also say that that terrorists can recruit through social media. As I talked about, as it bites into the vagueness, we don't know how many they're recruiting. We don't know how they're doing this through social media. We don't even know how many people in this poverty-stricken lands actually have access to social media. They say one's enough. Judge, if you think one's enough, then you can vote for them. I don't think one's enough to gain any solvency hold here. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so does your plan affect the leadership at all by just relieving debt?
Our plan does not affect the leadership. However, when debt is decreased, people now gain trust in their government. People now have a better quality of life. People now live better. When they start to live better, you will now see local social movements upgrow. More people have more freedom. Now people are more willing to challenge leadership if they need be. Moving on to the counter plan. They talk about that they want to perm the plan. Judge, here's the problem. We don't want their plan. Let's be really, really clear. So even if they try to perm this, and A tells you that they think there's merit here, B, we don't buy into any DAs that we've offered. So they have no solvency there. So if you need to pick something, you could prefer our plan. Now they talk about that ours is vague. Well, again, let's talk about the abuse of prep time. We're limited to prepping a counter plan right now. So again, we relieve debt. We say debt relieves, helps poverty. Poverty bites in. So we actually do more to solve in this situation than they do. Is there anything else on here?
Like, you can't perm because they're two different coalitions.
You also can't perm because they're two different coalitions. So in essence, what they're trying to do is kind of redundant. You're not going to have debt forgiveness at the same time spending the same amount of money. They actually do clash. That's, again, a reason to prefer us. Now moving to the on case. Let's, advantage number 2, which is the cutting off recruitment. Now again, we'll go back to the $280 million, and we say we have no idea how much money. But they say they, where do I have it here? Not stop shoes. They talk about we can't stop Twitter, and they say, well, maybe you can't stop Twitter, but you can monitor Twitter, you can subpoena here and stuff. They offer us no comparison. Does the Nigerian government have the same subpoena power that the U.S. government has? They say the U.S. government will just subpoena things for Twitter. We find out who has us. We don't know. I mean, Nigeria's a corrupt government as it is. They've said that the leadership is an issue, that there's corruption over there. So what makes us think that we're now going to have this solid legal state that's going to subpoena and offer this information? So I think you could just, their responses are really, there's no solvency to their response. Moving on to the observation number 3, that Boko Haram is dangerous. Now again, they talk about that. Their first response is when we say that the area is being claimed back, their response is that Chad recently, and we would agree with them, Chad lost several, we don't have a number, but a lot of soldiers. My response to this is Chad lost a lot of soldiers. We agree to that as fact. That does not comment on the fact that the area was reclaimed. You can lose a lot of soldiers and be successful in reclaiming the area. So while it is tragic that Chad lost soldiers and they died in this war, they did still reclaim the area. They offer you nothing different. Their response is Chad lost soldiers, not that Chad lost soldiers and did not gain back the territory. So therefore, we still have gained back, which now means their arguments are not unique because it's already happening. They've already reclaimed back the area. Moving on to number 3, a lack of trust in the AU. You can just completely turn this, because if you already distrust something, and now that and this bites into the DA of vagueness, you don't have a solid plan, that means this is likely to fail. When it's likely to fail, distrust actually increases. So by trying to run a plan with complete vagueness, no specifics, no idea how you're going to do this, you're actually going to turn this. Trust is going to go down in the African Union. For all these reasons, I urge you to vote an opt ballot.
Okay, thanks one last time for everyone for being here, and let's get right into this debate. I'm just going to do voters right now. So my first voter is going to be cycle of poverty. in their speech, they admitted that poverty is the reason why people commit extremist acts. They admit that it's the reason that they're more likely to be join terrorist groups and recruit. So we cut things off at the source. Because we help decrease poverty, we're cutting things off at the source and we're fixing the problem. We're actually fixing it, not just like a symptom, and we're not trying to just stop Twitter from happening. My next voter is going to be vagueness, which is the one I should have started with. But vagueness, because when I gave my first speech, all I knew is that they were going to do something with Twitter, that they were going to stop Boko Haram recruiting on Twitter. But then I was asking, how are they going to stop? And the answer was, they'll subpoena people. But that didn't really address anything. But then they also added that the troops were going to be on the ground, that they're going to send 52 countries are all going to send troops. They're going to all send equipment. I don't know that they have, that they'll parcel in $280 million somehow. It doesn't really make any sense. So if you're confused on their plan, so am I. So that's why you should vote with vagueness. They didn't address our standards of like laying out a fair debate. So you can flow that across, and this abuse has turned into real abuse. So that's why you can just vote on it right here, right now, and not look at anything else, Judge. My next is going to be counterplan. Because we give you a counterplan that lists what countries have to do to participate, they have to provide troops to Nigeria or do military/humanitarian aid. That's all you have to do, and then they'll get debt relief. That's a simple plan. It's better. They tried to permit, even though it's like redundant and simple. It's like redundant for them to do both. We have a simple plan that stops Boko Haram. It will send these troops in. It will form a coalition. It will do all their advantages, get all the solvency that they don't even have, and it will end this cycle of poverty disadvantage. That's the big one. They never address poverty. Then my next point is the perm. And this isn't a voter, but we'll just talk about it. What they want to do is have all the African countries get together and send troops through the African Union. But then they separately want the African countries to step back and then individually send aid and more troops through to Nigeria to get these WTO like debt forgiveness. So you're just making everything redundant. You're trying to get people to do things twice. It's not going to work that way. And they just have a worse plan. It makes both plans worse if you do both. It doesn't make them better. So then let's get on to their cutting off recruitment. My voter here is that we actually get rid of the source of recruitment, which is poverty. They don't. They just want to fight it on Twitter. They want like this cyber the defense force that apparently the African Union has to stop all the Twitter followers of Boko Haram. But we want to solve the source of the problem. So that's why you should be voting for us. Then you should be voting on the turn, Judge. We tell you how their plan has no inherency, no solvency, how there's already coalitions in Africa doing this, that they've already taken back all these countries. We have sources that back that up. And then we turned how, because they're doing a redundant, pointless plan, it's going to decrease trust in the AU. You should vote for us, Judge. Thank you.
Alright, for a roadmap, I'm going to talk about 90% of the military, and then I'm going to go over the overview of their voters and then our voters. Everybody ready? Okay, so the first voter is the cycle of poverty. However, they mentioned the cycle of poverty and how that leads to terrorism. However, like we mentioned, poverty is just only one of many reasons why people join terrorist groups, so they don't solve for the cycle of how Boko Haram is causing terror. And number two's response is the PERM completely solves for the whole DA. Once you vote for the government team, you completely relieve all the countries of the debt that are on the coalition. So now we, as a government team, solve for this whole cycle of poverty in itself. And we also solve for all the people that's still joining Boko Haram that's not through poverty. Two, they say vote on vagueness. However, they keep mentioning that we have this potential abuse. However, we never potentially abuse them in any means necessary, and that never came in at any point. We also asked questions right after the plan text. Any questions? And they did not ask any questions on, well, how much money exactly? How many troops? If they wanted to know this, they could have provided. They could have asked that when I gave them their opportunity. And we said that it was going to be through normal means of the 50 countries, and they're going to use the money that's sufficient. And they dropped this argument, so you can flow that across, and that goes dropped. So that is what the debate is about. And they say that we don't provide funding, but we said through normal means. They dropped through the normal means. And also, their counterplan is just vague in itself. Like we mentioned, it's vague. They don't say how much funding is going to be used, like how much debt are they going to relieve, and what's the exception to get that debt relief. Does country only have to donate $1 and they get relieved of freaking all their debt? That's just absurd and vague in themselves. So you're not going to vote on vagueness because we show you that both teams provide plans that are debatable. However, just because we don't provide you with a 10-minute code plan text of the specifics, that you're not going to even want to consider voting on that. And this is the new. We're not abusing them on any fairness because we gave them all the grounds they needed. We told them it's going to be intel, resources, and troops on the collaborative effort of the 50 countries. And just because they did not take that into consideration doesn't mean you should listen to their plan text. Also, now I'm going to get into the supreme voters. Why are you going to vote for us? Supreme voter number one, the perm. There was no competition, no net benefits at any point. So it's easy to just vote on the perm. When the opposition comes up here, provides a very easily permeable plan, you're going to vote on the perm every single time because there's absolutely no competition. We could get relieved of the countries and their debt and help solve to fight against Boko Haram with the African Union coalition. And it's not going to cause any harm. It's actually going to cause just increase of double solvency that the government team gets. But the counterplan does not get the unique solvency through our advantages that we'll get to. Voter number two is that we solve for help stopping recruitment through social media from Boko Haram. The only thing they like to say is that, well, how many people are using social media if they're all in poverty? But my partner mentioned that there's over millions of people that have access to internet in Africa, and we showed you with warrants that these terrorist groups like Boko Haram use social media to recruit people. And we mentioned how the African Union already has a cybersecurity task force with the infrastructure already built, so they can easily use this task force in the coalition to help fight against social media recruitment against Boko Haram. This is something that the government team gets that the opposition does not solve for because they do not use the African Union's cybersecurity task force. And we've shown you that with the African Union's coalition to fight against Boko Haram, that they will collaborate with their resources, intel, and troops that I mentioned in the plan text to fight against Boko Haram. And we've shown you through one example that they had one task force that had one battle against Boko Haram, and they were able to defeat them in that battle. So we've shown you when we add the actual coalition with actual support from 50 countries providing to that coalition fight against Boko Haram, that's going to be more beneficial than one task force that only involved 2 countries. We're talking about a coalition, not a task force. They keep talking about how none of our stuff links and we have no inherency because there's already a task force. However, there's a difference between 8,000 size task force and a coalition of 50 countries collaborating, intel, resources, and troops together to fight against Boko Haram. So we still have access to all our inherency, and so that means we have access to all our impacts of saving lives. They completely dropped all our arguments about how Boko Haram is committing mass murder to over 2,000 people in one incident. They even dropped that Boko Haram killed 12 people today. And this is something that their counterplan does not solve for at all. But our plan does, and we have access to decreasing Boko Haram's power and strength and increasing the quality of life in Africa because we're going to help decrease the amount of innocent people that are being killed, which goes completely dropped every single time by our opponents. It gets flowed across all the way. And we also solve for poverty as well because of perm. It's easily perm and there's no competition. For these reasons, you're going to vote for the government because we help protect lives and solve for poverty.
Yo, what does it mean that something there's no test of competition? What does that mean?